All right, we're back, ready to put this movement back together. I did add another coat of wax to the movement off camera, and as you can see, it just really shined up nicely. Feels real smooth, nice and clean, even smells better. If you compare the one that I oiled to the one that I waxed, I honestly prefer the wax. The oil movement or the oiled wood tends to darken more, and as time goes on, that blotchy look will go away. The oil will completely saturate or soak into the wood and disappear. But the wax, it's really a preferred method for me. So use your judgment on that. All right, before we actually do start putting this together, now is a really opportune time to get a little bit of oil on that click, okay? And as it turns out, these were in pretty darn good shape for how rusted this thing was. I'm really rather surprised. Not only that, but each little sprocket for the chain wheel, those are nice and they're still nicely formed. They still have a nice sharp edge on them. Believe it or not, this I just expected this whole thing to be in far worse condition than it turned out to be. So we won't need to do any repair work to the chain wheel, the ratchet, the click, etc. This video is probably going to be quite long as it is, so I'll save that for a future video. We're going to need the stop wheel with the cam on it. We're going to need the wheel with the stop pin on it. Okay, so that's the cog or gear with a single little pin on it. Okay. Now at some point we're also going to need to start putting some of those levers in there. And then of course we have the fly, which is also known as the governor, which controls the speed at which the strike train is turning, and it keeps it at a regular turning rate. While I have this out, I want to mention that you will notice they're all constructed a little differently, but this one here has a prepared spring that runs around the little arbor and then comes across the fan blades here. That it should be set as far as tension so that the fan still turns, but with a little bit of resistance. So in other words, if I was to blow on it or ping it with my finger, it shouldn't keep spinning freely. If it does, then it's too loose, okay? And what you're gonna get is a strike train that kind of is a runaway train, so to speak. So you wanna just feel a little bit of tension there as you're turning this, but it literally will come to a stop. But when this arbor, as it's in the train, comes to a screeching halt, the fan can actually still turn a little bit, and it doesn't put so much stress on the train itself. So that quarter cutout is facing the right side of the movement there, okay? And that position is such that the stop lever, I gotta get that count lever on the top of it like this, otherwise it's not gonna go in. Okay, and then I'm gonna line that little slot up with this little bracket that we had trouble getting in the first place. And I gotta get that to drop in, there we go. Okay. Now you can see how that stop lever has to drop right into that little quarter notch of the stop wheel, and it is at that point at where it's meshing with this gear with the ratchet wheel that I need to have that ratchet wheel so that that pin is lined up with that upper notch, okay? And that looks about right, okay? I gotta keep it in that position as I go to put this thing back together. Not always easy, especially on your first go, as I mentioned. So now we're going to put the stop pin wheel in there. Okay, now that pin on that stop wheel needs to basically be right in front of the nose of the stop lever. The stop lever needs to have already dropped right into that notch. So as you can see, just turning it, I've now moved that stop pin from where I had it all the way over to here. So I'm going to need to move it away from that lower gear, that lower cog. And I'm going to need to turn it back into position. Okay? Now, if all goes well, everything will stay in position until I get that back plate on. We're in here. Alright, get that to all mesh together here, drop in. So I'm going to take that back plate and try to get everything to drop back in place without everything turning and moving here. And that's going to require a little bit of patience. Now I'm going to have to lift that count lever up so that this can, matter of fact, now at this point I might want to just get that out of the way. Yeah, keep working it till all the gears are lined up with those bushing holes and everything can just kind of drop back into place. Okay, gonna take a little bit of a go here. Now another tool that I really like to use for this, just a homemade little tool. You just take a little piece of wooden dowel and run a 6 or so inch piece of wire and just put an S bend on the end of it, okay? That will allow me to go in and hook onto one of the arbors and push, or hook around it and pull. So it's really, really helpful when you're working in tight quarters to get these bushings lined up, bushing holes lined up with the pinions. Okay, it looks like I got it in there. Now the question will be, is everything lined up where I had originally had it? Okay, let's put this stop lever in and let's have a look at it. And like I mentioned, if not, you just try again until you succeed. Okay, and the trick is getting this lever in there. Okay, wow. I think I lucked out. Well, except that I didn't. I lucked out in that it's ending okay. Watch this. So it goes through, drops in, the stop pin hits, but I got a funny feeling that it's not indexed correctly because I think this pin needs to be closer to this ledge. It's advanced too much. So now what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to lift that back plate up, and I'm going to have to try to independently move that ratchet wheel back until that pin is lined up with that mark, but without moving the other cogs. Okay? Alright, so it took me actually about 2 tries off camera here to get everything lined up correctly, and it looks like we're pretty close. So if I set this off here and it drops down in and comes to a stop, it looks like this pin is just slightly above this ledge where I want it to be. But the only way that I'm going to really know for sure if that's the correct location for indexing is I'm going to have to start putting some levers in there. The 2 lift levers for the cuckoo pipes and the lift lever for the gong. So I'm going to have to get those in there in order to know for sure if we're indexed correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that little screw here into the side piece of the movement here to hold that rear plate. A long lift lever for a cuckoo pipe, a shorter one, and a gong, and it goes in that position. The longer lever for the cuckoo goes on the bottom. Okay, and the shorter one goes above that. And the gong lever, which also includes a spring, goes above that. So we left that little eye hook for that spring, and we want to wind it around one time to give it a little bit of tension, right? And line it up, and if we get it lined up, we're lucky we get it in there. You got to make sure the pin is on the right side of the ratchet wheel. There we go. So we got a little bit of tension there for that. I'm going to try to set this off with, what I could do is take a chain that will help in testing it here. Okay, and I'm going to need to take a screwdriver and turn that ratchet until that chain drops through the hole here. Then I can grab a hold of it. Okay, so we need to get that gong lever pushed over. Looks like I'm going to have to put a pin in there to hold that in place. Otherwise it's not going to engage. Patience is a virtue, especially on this part. Okay, now it looks like that's holding in, so I can see where I'm at here. Okay, last lever. Oh, we got just a slight lift happening on that gong lever. See, it just goes up before it stops. So my calculation was right. That pin needed to be lined up with the lower edge of this ledge, and that would have been the sweet spot. That would have been the perfect location for it. Is it going to be detrimental on this movement? Probably not. It looks like it feels like it moves pretty easily. So even though that's going to just begin to raise, I'm going to take a shot at it and not worry about. I'm going to call that index. I'm going to call that good enough. Now again, there are some movements where it needs to be more precise so that it's not starting to put tension on the train right as it gets started. But in this case, I'm not going to worry about it. I think we're going to be okay. Okay. So let's get the rest of the pins in here, specific to the hole that was originally created. So we'll try this one. Well, looks like that one's going into that hole a little better. You just want to make sure that it's not, see how it's holding it back, so that's not good. I don't want that to hold that back. It's got to still be free moving here. Yep, there we go. And yet it won't pull out. So let me try dropping that in just a tad bit more. There we go. Yeah, still causing a little tension there, so let's get it to free up here. Gotta be able to move freely. If it's not moving freely, then it's not gonna rewrite. There we go. Okay. All right, move on to the next one here. All right, now we have to get this lever in there as well, and this one here is going to have the trip mechanism on the front, and this bar here is going to have to go just under that stop lever, but above the other cog here. See if I can get it into the right spot. There we go. And once we get it in there, drop it down, and I'm going to pull that pin out a little bit here. And I can slide it over to that pin. Push that pin back in. And okay, seems to be going in there okay. Still working freely. Now, last but not least, we have one more U-nail, and I believe that was right over this piece here.
Without more licensed workers, Gary's roofing business might hit its ceiling. Hey, a new concept just got pushed up. We're gonna need all hands on deck.
Okay, holding it in place and yet allowing it free movement. Now, if we did everything correctly, we'll take the time shaft and put it in here and give it a turn, and it looks like it's working. Okay, now we're ready to put the time train together. We do still have that tiny little cog that turns the count wheel that I mentioned. You don't want to lose that, so you want to get that. We might as well go ahead and get that back on there. Oftentimes there's a mark, and on this one unfortunately there is not, but oftentimes what they'll do is once that tiny little cog is on there and those holes are lined up, they'll take a little chisel or a file, and they'll mark a little groove, so it makes putting it back together so much easier. But in this case we're going to just have to eyeball it, find out where that hole is for that tiny little pin, which should be somewhere in one of these cups. And sure enough, here we go. That's why you want to make sure you hold on to every little pin that you pull out of the movement. Then you won't have to create new ones. And if we have that hole lined up right, that pin should go right back into place, and bingo. Okay, now we're ready for that time train, and I'm happy to report this side is really easy. There's no indexing to do, so it's pretty much just get all the parts, put them in there, and move on forward. Let's not forget, we got to go ahead and use that opportunity to oil that click on this side as well. We want to make sure that that click is able to freely move here. And again, the side here also cleaned up very nicely. Inspecting those spokes on that ratchet wheel for the chain, they're all nice and pointy, nice and sharp. So we're looking good. It's just amazing that these were not in far worse shape. I really was expecting to have to do some work on them. Okay. So we want to take that wheel. It's going to go the opposite direction of the strike side here. Okay, we'll get the second wheel and put that in there. Now I did mention that I was going to check the tolerance on these. They're not bad, they're not the greatest, but they're not so far off that I think it's going to pose a problem on this movement. For the sake of this video and getting through it, I'm not going to do any bushing work. So that last wheel here that I put in with the sharp shaped teeth on it, okay, that is the escapement wheel, and that's the last one to go in there. And we will put the pallet with the anchor on there. We'll put that on later. I guess that's a good reason to save that one for last. Okay. No oil on it yet. That's spinning nicely. Okay. I did take an opportunity to make some new pins to hold those back plates on. And I made them out of brass. One for each side here. This one I believe is for the strike train side here. And I just weasel that back and forth till it's in there nice and firm. And I take the second one here and get it into the time train side. Weasel that one in there. Double check it, make sure that it's not going to drop back out as that one just did. So I'm going to have to angle it a little bit differently here. And make sure that it's penetrating into the wood. Now it's in there firm. Because I don't want that pin to drop out and have that back plate falling out later. Then all those gears just fall apart. Okay, so we put that time shaft through there. Comes through that little bracket that was in the side, the back plate there. And that's going to require, also that had a little pin in it. Okay, I'm going to just bring it up and around the top edge of that so that it's, so that as that turns, it's not going to interfere with the side plates and so forth. So it's just to keep that time shaft in place there. Okay. All right, with that all back together, I actually can now go back to the strike train and I can get that count wheel on there. So we're just going to slide it under the count lever. All right, I'm going to create a little pin for that count wheel here. I'm going to use a tiny little piece of brass wire, and I beveled the outer edge of it. And we'll see how that fits in there. that. Very good. Okay. All right. Now we got the count wheel back on. Need to get the pallet, get it lined up into the birch plate on the opposite side here. Right in there. There we go. Then get the front edge attached. And I can come back around to the front and tighten up that screw. Okay, by doing that, that allowed me to get that pallet arbor in there without having to do it while I'm lining up the gears. Let's see, we got the clicks going this way, so if we pull it this way, voila. Okay, that's with no oil, ticking. Okay, we're ready to put that front assembly back together. So as you recall, this is, now you can see it's a spring. It's actually brass. It's got a little square hole in it, which fits right over that arbor of that ratchet wheel for the time side. And then we have another cog that has basically like lantern pinions which will have a washer over the top of it. So we're going to take that and we're going to place it over that shaft or that arbor with those lantern pinions facing up. Now at this point in time, it's a good time to take a little bit of, and I use lithium grease. I use a little tiny bit of white lithium grease, and I just put 4 little dabs, and you can see where that's 2 outer edges of that spring are riding on that gear or that cog. So I'm just going to go put 4 little points on there, not too much, okay, because that's going to cause a little bit of friction here on this gear. Then you're going to need to put the time wheel on next, and that has to line up with those gears, and then you can place this washer on there. It's going to take compressing this down just a tiny bit to get a pin in there. So we'll find a pin. Hopefully we still have a pin that was used in there. Oh, before we go too far, let me back that off and let me take that off. If you recall, I said in the video, I noted that there was a thin little brass washer that went on the front end of this. And I almost forgot that. So now we got that in place. Now I can put this little washer on the front here. So I'm going to need to apply a little bit of downward pressure on that wheel against that brass spring. Okay. And as soon as I release the pressure, it's pushing that washer back up against that pin. Right. So the idea here is that as I spin this around with that little bit of that lithium grease on there, it can help it turn a little bit freely. That's a little bit stiff. You want some tension on this wheel, but not too much. And you know, I'm feeling this and that. What that does is when you go to turn the hands to advance the time, the tension on this will determine how hard you have to, how much pressure you have to have on that hand to turn it. And on most of these cuckoo clocks, you have bone hands, and they can tend to be brittle. So I like to keep this. A little bit. Oh, I wouldn't say loose, but I like to not have too much tension on it. So I'm going to take this back apart. I'll take that off. I'm going to pull that wheel off. As you can see, that lithium grease is spreading nicely on there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this spring and I'm going to center it on the pliers here. And I'm going to just take a little bit of, just a tiny bit of spring off of that. Just a little bit too firm. Let's put that back on there. And now I can put that wheel back on there, and you can pretty much feel how much tension is on there. Let's put this back on, and the washer. Okay, let's get that up. Now that feels much better. Okay, let's get some of these pliers back out of the way here. And now we have the bird post. That's going to be pretty easy. This one was really rusty. So even cleaning it up, you can see there it's still pretty pitted. But not going to be a big problem, because inside of the case, the cuckoo clock, you don't really want to see that shiny post anyway. So it's probably going to be to my advantage to have it not so shiny. So that's not a big deal. But what I did notice, and I did finally inspect this, I'm not sure whether that post had broken at some point and somebody put a collar over it and soldered it on. The only problem that I'm noticing is that there's a slight glob of solder here out on the outer edge, and that might interfere inside of that notch and cause a little bit of friction. So the one thing that I can't stress more, especially on these cuckoo clocks, is you want to eliminate all these variables, because the more variables you have, and what I mean by variables is things that are not quite working right, okay? They can start to pile up on you, and by the time you start putting this cuckoo clock back together, you start putting the movement in the case, you got a slew of other elements, lift wires, the little wire that opens the door, all the adjustments, etc. The fewer variables you have, the more chances you're going to be successful getting this thing operating correctly. So I'm going to, just for the sake of it, I'm going to grind off that little glob of solder. Okay, that looks a lot better. Let's put it in there and see if it's interfering at any point. That feels pretty good. Okay, let's try it out. Let's put that bird post in there. So we're going to need to hook that spring wire onto the wood as it was. Bring it up in there, drop it down, and then of course we got little brads or nails to put in the top of that. Let's just hold that on there. That feels pretty good. I don't feel anything binding there. It looks pretty clear. Let's go ahead and put some oil on this now. You don't need a lot of oil. On these wood plate movements, I don't even bother using a pin oiler. I like to use this more like a pen oiler, and I get a drop out there on the end of it and drop it in there. Okay, and I just kind of fill each bushing until I see it raised to the top. Don't forget that one under the count wheel. It's easy to miss that one. And put a little bit of oil right on that count wheel as well. The arbors and the brass plate there. Get a little bit on both sides. And where these arbors meet this pin in here, don't forget the verge plate on this side. There we go. Just a tiny bit. That's all it takes. Okay. I will have to put that trapeze wire back on there. I like to put a little bit of oil on that trapeze wire as well. That thing's going to be doing a lot of swinging back and forth. Okay. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot. I do like to put a little bit of oil between these two levers. The lever that swings the post over. Just one little drop there. Everything feels nice and tight and smooth. I can feel the amount of pull that I need to do on this chain is very little. So I can tell that as far as weight, we're not going to need a lot of weight to operate that movement now. Okay. Well, there you have it. Sure looks a lot better. Amazing what can be accomplished